Oberleutnant Klaus Richter heard it first, a sound that didn't belong in the forest. His Panther tank sat camouflaged beneath thick oak branches on a road east of Saint-Lô, engine idling, part of a column carrying desperately needed ammunition to the front. It was July 1944, and the Normandy hedgerows had become a grinding meat grinder. His orders were simple: deliver the ammunition and return before dark. Stay under tree cover, avoid open roads. The Allied air forces owned the sky. The sound came from high above the canopy, a distant rumble that grew rapidly louder. Not the steady drone of bombers, something faster, more aggressive, hunting. Richter climbed onto his tank's turret, scanning the pale blue summer sky. His gunner shouted a warning from inside. Aircraft! Northwest, low altitude. Then Richter saw them. 4 aircraft diving through scattered clouds, wings angled down, descending with predatory intent. They were massive, absurdly large for fighters, with broad wings and enormous engines that screamed as they dove. American markings, white stars on dark blue circles. P-47s, Thunderbolts, J-bows, the German soldiers called them, fighter bombers. For a split second, Richter thought they might pass over. His column was well camouflaged. The road was narrow, hidden by tree cover. Surely the Americans couldn't spot them. Then the lead aircraft opened fire. 8 50 caliber machine guns erupted simultaneously. The sound wasn't like ordinary gunfire. It was a ripping noise, a mechanical scream, as 75 rounds per second tore through air, wood, and steel. Tracers streaked downward like orange lightning. Tree branches exploded into splinters. The half-track ahead of Richter's Panther disintegrated, ammunition cooking off in a cascade of secondary explosions. The aircraft passed overhead in seconds. The noise faded. Richter's ears rang. His hands trembled. Then he heard it again, the sound of engines, circling. The 6-ton monster. Alexander Kartveli stared at blueprints that defied every convention of fighter aircraft design. It was spring 1940. The Georgian engineer at Republic Aviation had just received U.S. Army Air Corps specifications for a new fighter, high-altitude interceptor, heavily armed, capable of defeating anything the Luftwaffe could field. The problem was the engine. The Army wanted the Pratt Whitney R2800 double wasp, a massive 18-cylinder radial engine, producing 2,000 horsepower. To achieve high-altitude performance, the engine needed a turbocharger, but turbochargers generated enormous heat and required complex ducting to route exhaust gases efficiently. Kartveli's solution was radical. Build the entire aircraft around the turbocharged engine, place the cockpit far forward, run exhaust ducting along the fuselage to the turbocharger mounted in the rear. Except that the resulting aircraft would be enormous, heavy, and seemingly impractical. The XP-47B prototype emerged in 1941, weighing 6 tons empty, twice the weight of contemporary fighters like the Farm, Messerschmitt Bf 109, or Supermarine Spitfire. It measured over 36 feet long, with a wingspan exceeding 40 feet. The fuselage was so large and round that pilots immediately nicknamed it Jug, short for Juggernaut, though some claimed it referenced milk jugs due to its portly shape. Army Air Corps evaluators were skeptical. The P-47 was too big, too heavy, too fuel-hungry. Its internal fuel capacity was limited because wing space was consumed by 8 50 caliber Browning machine guns and their ammunition. Without external drop tanks, combat radius was barely 100 miles, but test flights revealed unexpected qualities. The massive Pratt & Whitney radial engine was virtually indestructible. Unlike liquid-cooled engines that failed catastrophically if coolant lines were hit, the air-cooled R2800 could absorb tremendous battle damage and continue running. The heavy airframe provided natural armor against ground fire. The 8 machine guns delivered devastating firepower. 3 seconds of sustained fire put 23 pounds of bullets into a target. Most importantly, the P-47's diving speed was extraordinary. The heavy weight that handicapped climb performance became an advantage in dives. Thunderbolts could exceed 450 miles per hour in vertical descents faster than most enemy aircraft could dive, fast enough to escape nearly any pursuit. Production began in 1942. The first operational unit, the 56th Fighter Group, under Colonel Hubert Zemke, deployed to England in January 1943. Their mission was bomber escort, protecting B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators during daylight raids over occupied Europe. The P-47 performed adequately as an escort fighter. Its range remained limited, despite external tanks. Its climb rate was mediocre. In dogfights against experienced Luftwaffe pilots, in Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190 aircraft, Thunderbolts won through superior speed and firepower, rather than maneuverability. But in March 1944, everything changed. The dawn of fighter bombing. Major Glenn Duncan was a rangy, aggressive Texan, flying with the 353rd Fighter Group. He was dissatisfied with the P-47's role as pure escort. After delivering bombers safely to their targets, fighter groups were supposed to remain at high altitude, watching for enemy interceptors. Duncan thought this was wasteful. Why not descend on the deck and attack ground targets before returning to base? His commanders were skeptical. Fighter pilots were trained for air-to-air combat. Ground attack was dangerous. Anti-aircraft fire could down aircraft at low altitude far more easily than enemy fighters could at high altitude. Strafing runs exposed pilots to everything from rifle fire to 88mm flak guns. Duncan argued that the P-47's rugged construction made it ideal for ground attack. The massive radial engine served as natural armor, protecting the pilot from frontal fire. The heavy airframe could absorb small arms damage that would down lighter aircraft. The 850 calibers could destroy ground targets as effectively as aerial ones. In March 1944, Duncan persuaded commanders to authorize an operational evaluation. He selected 16 volunteers who devised attack strategies, then took their Thunderbolts down to ground level to test low-level performance. The results were spectacular. P-47s screaming down from altitude at 400 miles per hour gave ground defenders virtually no time to react. The aircraft would appear, fire devastating bursts from 8 machine guns, and disappear before anti-aircraft crews could train their weapons. The sheer violence of the attack, 75 rounds per second, creating columns of destruction, hundreds of yards long, devastated any target caught in the man-open. After 5 successful missions, Duncan's volunteers returned to their units to spread the new doctrine. By April, fighter groups across the 8th Air Force were regularly conducting ground attack missions after escort duty ended. Railroad marshalling yards, airfields, supply depots, truck convoys, anything caught moving in daylight became fair game. The Luftwaffe's fighter force was already reeling from sustained air combat losses. Now German ground forces found themselves under constant attack whenever weather permitted flying. Simply moving equipment in daylight became suicidal. Columns had to travel at night or under heavy tree cover. Even then, roving P-47s would spot movement and attack. German troops developed a visceral fear of Allied fighter bombers. They learned to recognize the sound of different aircraft engines. The Merlin engine of P-51 Mustangs had a high-pitched whine. The Allison engines of P-38 Lightnings produced a distinctive whistle, but the Pratt and Whitney radial of the Thunderbolt made a deep, throaty roar that German soldiers learned to dread. The Germans called them Jabos, short for Jagbomber, fighter bomber. When someone shouted, "Jabos," men would dive for cover, abandoning vehicles and equipment. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical destruction. Colonel Hubert Zemke received his briefing on June 5 at Headquarters 8th Air Force Fighter Command. The invasion of Europe would begin the next morning. His 56th Fighter Group, the legendary Wolf Pack, would provide air cover for the landing beaches. Zemke had been softening up northwest Europe for months. His P-47s had attacked bridges, rail lines, coastal defenses, and airfields. They had destroyed so many Luftwaffe aircraft on the ground that German fighter presence over France was minimal. General Eisenhower told his troops before D-Day, "Don't worry about the planes overhead. They will be ours." This confidence was built on the work of fighter-bomber pilots who had systematically destroyed German air capability. By June 6th, only 2 German fighters reached the landing beaches. 26 others were destroyed attempting to reach the area. None even came within visual range of the coastline. The Thunderbolt's role on D-Day was simple but critical. Maintain constant air presence over the beaches and attack any German reinforcements attempting to reach the landing zones. Pilots flew mission after mission throughout the day, refueling and rearming between sorties. Lieutenant Leslie Bowes, of the 358th Fighter Group, flew his first mission before dawn. His P-47 carried two 500-pound bombs under its wings and full ammunition for all 8 machine guns. He dropped his bombs on coastal fortifications, then strafed German positions visible from the air. What struck Bowes most was the sheer scale of the operation below. The channel was packed with ships as far as he could see. The beaches were covered with landing craft and men. Smoke from German artillery obscured entire sections of coastline. The noise, even at 3,000 feet altitude, was overwhelming. His second mission that afternoon targeted German reinforcements moving toward the beaches. His flight found a column of trucks and half-tracks attempting to reach Carentan. The Thunderbolts dove in pairs, strafing the column from nose to tail. Vehicles exploded, overturned, careened into ditches. The column stopped completely, blocked by burning wreckage. This pattern repeated across Normandy throughout D-Day. German commanders had planned immediate counterattacks against the landing beaches. Those counterattacks required moving armor, artillery, and infantry to the coast. But Allied air superiority made movement in daylight impossible. Columns that attempted to advance were spotted and destroyed within minutes. The German response was to move only at night or under heavy cloud cover. This slowed reinforcement dramatically, giving Allied forces time to establish and expand the beachhead. The Thunderbolts' contribution to D-Day wasn't dramatic bombing of fortifications. It was the systematic destruction of German mobility. By July 1944, the P-47 had evolved from high-altitude escort to dedicated ground attack aircraft. Engineers had developed external ordnance configurations that transformed the Thunderbolt into a devastating fighter bomber. Early production P-47Ds could carry one 500-pound bomb under the fuselage centerline. Mid-production variants added wing hardpoints for 2 more 500-pound bombs or up to 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft. Rockets, universally known as Holy Moses, for their impact on targets. Each Holy Moses rocket carried the explosive power equivalent to a 105 mm artillery shell. Unlike bombs that required relatively precise placement, rockets could be fired in salvos that saturated target areas. A Thunderbolt carrying 10 rockets could deliver the striking power of an entire artillery battery in a single pass. The typical ground attack loadout became standard: 2 500-pound bombs, 6 to 10 rockets, and full ammunition for all 8 machine guns. Total ordnance weight exceeded 2,500 pounds more than most contemporary light bombers carried. But firepower meant nothing without survivability. Ground attack exposed pilots to concentrated anti-aircraft fire during the most vulnerable phase of flight: low altitude, relatively slow speed, predictable attack patterns. German flak crews became expert at tracking attacking aircraft and leading targets appropriately. The P-47's rugged construction saved countless pilots. The massive R2800 radial engine absorbed frontal damage that would have destroyed liquid-cooled engines. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevented catastrophic fires from fuel system hits. Armor plating behind the pilot's seat protected against rear-quarter attacks. Lieutenant Edwin Wright, of the 404th Fighter Group, survived being hit by flak 6 times over 4 months of operations. His aircraft returned to base with holes measuring up to 8 inches in diameter through propeller blades, wings riddled with shrapnel damage, control surfaces partially shot away. The Thunderbolt kept flying. This durability created a positive feedback loop. Pilots trusted their aircraft to bring them home, which encouraged aggressive tactics. Aggressive tactics produced better results and higher kill rates. Higher kill rates attracted more resources and better pilots to Thunderbolt units. By mid-1944, P-47 fighter bomber groups were achieving results far exceeding what their numbers suggested. The hedgerow hell. Normandy's hedgerow country was a defender's paradise and an attacker's nightmare. Ancient property boundaries created a landscape of small fields surrounded by earth berms, topped with thick vegetation. Each field was a natural fortress. German forces used this terrain brilliantly, creating defensive positions that could cover all approaches while remaining invisible from ground level. Allied ground forces advancing through the hedgerows faced murderous close-range combat. German machine gun positions could fire from concealment, then retreat through hidden paths before counterattack could develop. Armor support was limited. The narrow lanes and high berms channeled tanks into predictable routes where German anti-tank weapons waited. Progress was measured in yards per day. Individual hedgerows required hours or days to clear. Casualties mounted steadily. By late June, Allied commanders realized that breakthrough would require new tactics. The solution involved close air support on an unprecedented scale. P-47 fighter bomber groups, relocated from England to forward airstrips in France, hastily prepared fields barely 5 minutes flying time from the front lines. This proximity allowed rapid response to ground forces' requests for air support. Forward air controllers, ground officers with radio communication, to aircraft identified targets and coordinated attacks. A ground unit, encountering a German strongpoint, would request air support. Within minutes, Thunderbolts would arrive overhead, orbiting at 3,500 feet until directed to targets. The attacks were precise and devastating. Controllers would describe targets with remarkable specificity. Turn right at the S-curve in the river. Head up the 2-lane road, going 15 degrees northeast, and bomb the German tank behind the 3rd farmhouse on the east side of the road. Pilots would roll in, diving at 70-degree angles, releasing bombs from 1,000 feet, pulling out at treetop level while strafing any visible targets. The violence of these attacks shocked German defenders. One moment a position seemed secure, the next, 500-pound bombs were detonating directly on top of it, while machine gun fire raked everything within hundreds of yards. The psychological impact was profound. German soldiers developed acute anxiety about air attacks. They would scan the sky constantly, knowing that any aircraft sound could precede annihilation. Some units refused to move in daylight regardless of orders. Others abandoned equipment and scattered at the first sound of engines overhead. Operation Cobra, the breakout. July 25, 1944, St. Lo Sector, Normandy. Operation Cobra was the planned breakout from the hedgerow stalemate. American forces would concentrate overwhelming force on a narrow front, smash through German defenses, and race into open country beyond the hedgerows. Success required destroying German defensive positions and disrupting their ability to reinforce the breakthrough point. The air preparation was the most intensive ever attempted. Beginning at noon, waves of medium and heavy bombers dropped thousands of tons of explosives on a rectangular area, measuring 5 miles long by 1 mile wide. Following the heavy bombers came the P-47s. The Thunderbolts attacked in groups of 16, diving repeatedly on German positions that had survived the carpet bombing. They targeted anything that moved or looked like a defensive position: tanks, self-propelled guns, trucks, artillery pieces, command posts, communication lines. Some attacks achieved near-mythic effectiveness. Near Rancy, the 405th Fighter Group encountered a German column attempting to retreat. 122 tanks, 259 other vehicles, 11 artillery pieces. The Thunderbolts attacked for over an hour, making repeated passes despite intense flak. When ammunition was exhausted, pilots would climb for altitude, fly back to forward airstrips, rearm and refuel in under 10 minutes, then return to continue the attack. By late afternoon, the German column at Rancy was completely destroyed. Burning vehicles blocked every road. Ammunition was cooking off in cascading explosions. Survivors had fled into surrounding fields, abandoning equipment. The column had ceased to exist as a fighting formation. This pattern repeated across the breakthrough sector. German defensive doctrine relied on moving reserves to threatened points, but reserves couldn't move in daylight without being detected and destroyed by fighter bombers. By the time ground attack ended, German defensive cohesion had collapsed. American armor broke through on July 26. General George Patton's Third Army raced across France with minimal opposition. The war of position in Normandy transformed into a war of maneuver across open country. The Thunderbolts had enabled the transformation. The killing ground, the retreat across France became a slaughter. German forces attempting to withdraw eastward toward Germany found themselves under constant air attack. Columns would move at night, hide in forests during daylight, then attempt to continue the next night. But Allied aircraft flew round-the-clock missions. Even at night, moonlight and flares revealed movement. The P-47 units developed hunter-killer tactics specifically for destroying columns. Flights would patrol assigned sectors at medium altitude, watching for any sign of movement. When spotted, the lead aircraft would mark the target area with bombs or rockets, while the rest of the flight positioned for strafing runs. The attacks were systematic and thorough. The lead Thunderbolts would bomb the head and tail of the column, trapping vehicles between destroyed wrecks. Following aircraft would strafe the trapped vehicles from nose to tail, making repeated passes until nothing remained intact. If the column attempted to disperse into fields or forests, the attacks would follow, destroying vehicles individually. Captain William Colgan led a flight of 3 P-47s up the Rhone River Valley on August 28. They spotted a German column evacuating southern France, 30 miles long, vehicles proceeding 2 and sometimes 3 abreast. It was the largest concentration Colgan had ever seen. The 3 Thunderbolts attacked despite overwhelming odds. They made repeated passes for over an hour, expending all bombs, all rockets, and all machine gun ammunition. Other fighter groups monitoring the radio frequency heard Colgan's reports and diverted to join the attack. By late afternoon, dozens of P-47s were attacking different sections of the column simultaneously. The destruction was total. Thousands of vehicles were destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The road was littered with burning wrecks for miles. Survivors abandoned equipment and fled on foot. The retreat from southern France dissolved into chaos. German troops developed survival tactics. Some units painted red crosses on vehicles, pretending to be medical convoys that international law prohibited attacking. This worked briefly, until Allied intelligence confirmed the ambulances were carrying ammunition and troops. After that, nothing was safe from attack. Other units attempted camouflage so elaborate it became counterproductive. Vehicles covered in branches and vegetation were easily spotted because they looked unnatural. Units hiding in forests created obvious patterns visible from altitude. The best concealment was to remain completely stationary during daylight, with no fires, no movement, no radio transmissions. But stationary units couldn't advance or retreat, they could only survive. Battle of the Bulge, December 16, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The German counteroffensive caught Allied forces completely by surprise. 3 German armies, 29 divisions, totaling 400,000 men, smashed into lightly defended American positions in the Ardennes. The attack aimed to split Allied armies, capture the port of Antwerp, and negotiate a separate peace in the west. Initial German advances were rapid. American units were overrun or surrounded. Communication lines were cut. Command structure collapsed into chaos. The weather was terrible. Low clouds, heavy fog, occasional snow grounding. Allied air forces completely. For 48 hours, German armored spearheads advanced with minimal air opposition. They covered ground faster than any German offensive since 1940. Panzer commanders radioed optimistic reports. The Americans were retreating in disorder. The roads to Antwerp were open. Then, the weather cleared. On December 23, 9th Air Force P-47 groups launched en masse. Every available aircraft armed with maximum ordnance loads. The mission: find and destroy German armor, advancing through the Ardennes. The attacks began immediately. German columns that had been advancing freely suddenly found themselves under devastating air attack. Thunderbolts dove from clear blue skies, bombing and strafing anything that moved. Lead and trailing vehicles in every column were destroyed first, trapping everything between burning wrecks. Then the trapped vehicles were methodically annihilated. Captain James Wells led his flight through heavy fog on December 17th, betting he would break out before hitting mountain ridges. He emerged just feet above ground, with a German armored column directly below 8 tanks, moving in close formation along a narrow valley road. Wells's element dropped 4 500-pound bombs into the column. 2 tanks vanished completely. 6 others lay on their sides down the slope, guns twisted beneath them. The road was blocked by 2 deep craters. Similar attacks occurred constantly throughout the day. By nightfall, on December 23rd, the German offensive had lost momentum. Fuel trucks were destroyed before reaching frontline units. Ammunition convoys were incinerated on approach roads. Reinforcements never reached breakthrough points. The offensive continued into January, but German mobility was broken. Units could move only at night or during brief periods of bad weather. Whenever skies cleared, the Thunderbolts returned. By late January, German forces were retreating back to their starting positions, having failed to achieve any strategic objectives. The Battle of the Bulge demonstrated what air supremacy meant in modern warfare. German planning had been meticulous. Surprise was complete. Initial attacks succeeded brilliantly, but without control of the air, sustained offensive operations were impossible. The P-47 groups had broken the back of Hitler's last major offensive in the West. The final accounting, from D-Day to VE Day, June 6, 1944, through May 8, 1945, P-47 Thunderbolts claimed destruction of 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, 68,000 trucks, thousands of bridges, supply depots, airfields, and fortified positions. These numbers are claims, not verified kills. Ground attack made precise accounting impossible. When a pilot strafed a column and vehicles exploded or caught fire, that was counted as destroyed. Whether the vehicle was completely destroyed or merely damaged, whether it was loaded with troops or empty, whether it was repaired and returned to service, these details were unknowable. But even accounting for overclaiming, assuming actual destruction, was half the claimed figures, the impact was staggering. The Thunderbolt had enabled Allied ground forces to operate with impunity, while German forces could barely move in daylight. This asymmetry was decisive. The cost was substantial. Over 2,499 P-47s were lost to all causes in combat. Many pilots survived multiple aircraft losses, bailing out over friendly territory, crash-landing damaged aircraft, ditching in the channel, and being rescued. But casualty rates remained high. Ground attack was more dangerous than air-to-air combat. Pilots faced ground fire throughout every attack run, and even a single rifle bullet could cause fatal damage. The psychological cost was harder to quantify. Pilots who survived the war often struggled with what they had done. Strafing columns meant killing soldiers, truck drivers, men who had no chance to fight back or defend themselves. Some pilots rationalized it as necessary to save Allied ground forces. Others developed trauma that manifested years later. Tom Glenn, author of P-47 Pilots, The Fighter Bomber Boys, described one of his saddest missions, attacking columns of horse-drawn artillery. German forces late in the war relied increasingly on horses for transport. Allied pilots would strafe these columns, killing horses alongside soldiers. Glenn wrote, "The horses were not our enemy, but our assignment was to prevent those columns from harming our troops." The moral complexity of strategic bombing and ground attack would be debated for decades. Were fighter-bomber pilots warriors or executioners? Were ground attack missions legitimate military operations or war crimes? These questions had no simple answers, only the brutal fact that air supremacy enabled victory, and victory required killing enemy forces, however and wherever they could be found. The aircraft that transformed air combat. The P-47 Thunderbolt was produced in greater quantities than any other American fighter, 15,636 aircraft. Delivered between March 1942 and December 1945, it served in every theater where American forces fought: Europe, Pacific, Mediterranean, China, Burma, India. Its combat record was remarkable: 3,572 aerial victories, more than any other Allied fighter. This, despite being phased out of escort duty by the longer-range P-51 Mustang. The Thunderbolt's air-to-air kill ratio was 4.6 to 1 for every P-47 lost in air combat. Over 4 enemy aircraft were destroyed. But aerial combat was never the Thunderbolt's defining role. The aircraft transformed ground attack from a specialized mission into the primary purpose of fighter aviation. Before the P-47, fighters were designed to shoot down other aircraft. Ground attack was secondary. almost an afterthought. The Thunderbolt reversed this priority. The aircraft proved that heavily armored fighters could survive and thrive in the ground attack role. Its rugged construction, powerful armament, and high-speed diving capability created a template that influenced jet fighters designed decades later. The A-10 Warthog, officially designated A-10 Thunderbolt II, was explicitly designed to replicate the P-47's ground attack effectiveness using modern technology. The psychological impact was equally significant. German ground forces learned to fear air attack more than artillery, more than armor, more than anything except perhaps sustained infantry assault. The sound of Pratt and Whitney radials became a death sentence. Columns would scatter at that sound, abandoning vehicles and equipment, fleeing into forests and ditches, hoping to survive until the aircraft left. This fear was rational. A P-47, diving at 400 miles per hour, with 8 machine guns firing and rockets launching, was unstoppable. Flak guns might hit one aircraft, but the others would complete their attack. The violence was sudden, overwhelming, and impossible to escape. Vehicle armor that protected against small arms was useless against 50 caliber bullets. Camouflage that fooled ground observers was obvious from altitude. There was no defense except not being there when the Thunderbolts arrived. Oberleutnant Klaus Richter survived the war. His Panther tank was destroyed in the attack east of Saint-Lô, but he and his crew escaped with minor injuries. He spent the remaining months of the war avoiding air attacks, moving only at night, hiding in forests during daylight, watching the skies constantly. In interviews decades later, Richter described that first encounter with P-47s. We expected Allied air superiority. We knew the Luftwaffe couldn't protect us, but we thought our camouflage and tree cover would hide us. We thought if we moved carefully, we could avoid being spotted. He paused, remembering. Then those massive aircraft appeared and everything we thought was wrong. They saw us through the trees. They dove so fast we had no time to disperse. The noise of their guns, like the world being torn apart. In 30 seconds, half our column was destroyed. The aircraft climbed away, and we thought maybe it was over. And again, they kept coming until there was nothing left to attack. Richter's experience was replicated thousands of times across France, Belgium, and Germany. German tank crews, truck drivers, artillery teams, all learned the same lesson. Daylight movement meant death from above. The Thunderbolts owned the sky, and from that sky they rained destruction on anything that moved. The P-47's impact on World War II cannot be overstated. It enabled the Normandy breakout. It broke the German counteroffensive in the Ardennes. It systematically destroyed German logistics and mobility across Western Europe. It forced the Wehrmacht to operate at night, hampering their ability to respond to Allied advances. More fundamentally, the Thunderbolt demonstrated that air power could be decisive in land warfare, not through strategic bombing of cities and factories, but through direct attack on enemy forces attempting to maneuver. This lesson would shape military aviation for the rest of the 20th century and beyond. The German soldiers who survived encounters with Thunderbolts never forgot them. The sound of that massive radial engine, the sight of those broad wings diving through clouds, the orange tracers streaking down like angry lightning, the explosions, the fire, the helplessness of being caught in the open with nowhere to run and no way to fight back. They never expected fighter aircraft to destroy armored columns. They never imagined that air power alone could stop offensive operations. They never anticipated that something as absurd as a 6-ton fighter nicknamed Jug would become the most feared weapon in the Allied arsenal. But that's exactly what happened. The P-47 Thunderbolt, too heavy, too big, too fuel-hungry, became the aircraft that transformed air warfare, not through elegance or grace, but through raw power, relentless aggression, and the simple fact that it worked. German tank crews never expected it. By the time they learned to fear it, the war was already lost. If this deep dive into the P-47 Thunderbolt's transformation from high-altitude escort to devastating ground attack weapon fascinated you, subscribe to this channel for more untold stories about the aircraft, tactics, and technologies that changed the course of World War II. Leave a comment below. Did you know about the P-47's ground attack role before watching this? What surprised you most, the aircraft's durability, its firepower, or the psychological impact on German forces? How do you think modern close air support compares to what Thunderbolt pilots accomplished in 1944–45? Your engagement and insights help shape our future content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we upload new investigations into World War II's most influential weapons systems, from the drawing boards where they were conceived to the battlefields where they proved their worth. Share this video with aviation enthusiasts, military history buffs, or anyone interested in understanding how tactical innovation and raw engineering created one of the war's most effective weapons. The story of the P-47 deserves to be known beyond just aviation circles. And if you want to support even deeper research into World War II aviation, including extended interviews with veteran pilots and access to rare archival footage and documents, check out our membership options. Members get early access to videos, behind-the-scenes content, and detailed supplementary materials that couldn't fit into the main video. Thank you for watching. The next time you see a modern close air support aircraft, like the A-10 Warthog, remember that its mission and tactics trace directly back to those P-47 pilots who pioneered ground attack in the skies over Europe 80 years ago. History doesn't just teach us what happened, it shows us how innovation, adaptation, and courage can transform the seemingly impossible into the inevitable. The P-47 was too big to be a fighter, too heavy to be agile, too fuel-hungry to go the distance. And yet it became the aircraft that German tank crews feared most, the weapon that enabled Allied victory, the machine that proved sometimes the best tool for the job is the one nobody expected to work. Until next time, keep questioning conventional wisdom, keep learning from history, and never forget that the most effective weapons are often the ones that break all the rules. Remember, air supremacy isn't just about shooting down enemy aircraft. It's about making the enemy afraid to move, afraid to fight, afraid to even show themselves in daylight. The Thunderbolt taught that lesson better than any aircraft before or since.